Hello everyone! In this video we are going to explain CSS Animations, and by the end of this video you are going to learn everything about CSS Animations and you are going to love it. For a start, I have created a div, an empty div here, and I have applied some CSS properties to this, a display inline block, a width and a height, a border and a background color, and so that you can see this element here. We have an element to start with, and let's even increase the zoom and put that on, for example, 150% so that those who are watching this video with small screens so that they can see better. And let's start learning about CSS animation with an example. So the first thing that we need to do is to actually define an animation. And in CSS, we use the word @keyframes in order to define animations, and we need to have a name for that. For example, I am going to use the name test for now, but we will come back use more proper name. But for start, we have to start with this syntax @keyframe and name and these brackets. Well, in CSS Animations, we are basically trying to change the state of an element from something to something else. For example, from color red to color blue, from background color yellow to background color green, things like that. So inside our keyframe, we have two sections, a from section and a to section. And inside these from sections and to sections, we just apply some CSS properties, write some CSS property, but have in mind that not every CSS property is animatable. In fact, when you check the documentations about CSS properties, they all have a section that they say animatable yes or no, animatable yes or no. For example, if you want to change the background color of something with animation, and if you check the documentation for background color, you can see that the background color is actually animatable. So that's something that when you check in documentation, you can see. So let's use an animatable CSS property like background color, and we can say that, hey, this animation changes the background color of something from green to, let's say, for example, yellow. A very simple example, because I didn't want to use some other CSS property. It's just a simple CSS property like background color. Okay, now we defined our CSS animation, but now we need to use this CSS animation for something. If we come back here, hit refresh, of course nothing happens because we have selected this box, but we haven't applied this animation to that. So we need to use a CSS property called animation name, and inside animation name we write down the name of the animation that we created. And of course, writing down only the animation name is not enough. And of course, if we come back here, still nothing happens because we need to specify another CSS property, and that's animation duration. Because we need to specify how long should browser execute this animation. Sure, yes, the background color is going to change from green to yellow, sure, but how long should it take? So that's why we need to use something called animation duration as well. So now it's possible. So for example, use 2 seconds. And there's something that might be in your mind that you think, okay, the background color is now something called here a light salmon, and it's coming green, yellow. What happens? What should the result? It may be something that you are thinking about, and now you can see the result for yourself. If we hit refresh, you can see the background color changes from green to yellow, but when the animation is finished, when the animation finishes, it goes back to the default. In fact, it goes back to the factory settings, something like that. So for a moment, when the animation is started, the background color goes green, and then slowly changes from green to yellow, okay? And when the animation is finished, everything goes back to what we had before. And of course, it's something that we can customize. We can see in this video that we can say, hey, when the animation is finished, you can stick with to section, or you can stick with from section, or you can go back to the default thing that you had. This is something that we can actually control. So these are the necessary things for running an animation. You need to have an animation name, an animation duration, and there are more CSS properties related to animations that we need to learn in this session. But before we go on, I want to mention something that here we used keywords from and to. We can even have more control to this. For example, we can have an animation that has, for example, we can specify percent, for example, from 0%, 10%, 20%, 25%. So imagine that we do not have just a from and to, we have 100 more segments actually. So and let's use a proper name for this one. I hit double click on this, Control D, and I call it, for example, BG change. Okay, and if we come back here, hit refresh, still the animation is working, and this is BG change. So let's define another CSS animation, and also, so this is the way we can actually define multiple CSS animations and use this animation for our different selectors. For example, we can apply an animation to box here. For example, let's use that as box 1, and this div here is our box 1, and we can have a box 2 as well. So for this one, we are using different colors. So let's use, for example, for this one, let's use this aqua, and use, for example, purple for the background color of this one. And let's clean this animation. So for both of them are using this animation, and when the animation is finished, they come back to the default thing that we had. So for this second animation that we have, I'm going to use percent. And again, let's use the word test for this one. We come back and use a proper name for that. But for this one, we have a 0%. I'm going to have 3 sections, a 50%, and it's just up to us. We can have as much as we want, and a 100% sections. And inside this test, so I'm going to apply the animation of test to the second box and BG change to the first one. So this is something that now we can see that we can actually go ahead and apply more steps actually to this one, and we can actually go ahead and use Alt arrow down in order to move something here, duplicate this line, Alt down to move that there, and for them just use some other color names, just whatever it is. And sure enough, if we come here, hit refresh, we can see that we didn't apply that test to the, we have a typo here, BG test here, it seems. Yes, so we have here refresh, and of course now it has 2 segments and it has 3 segments. So this is what we have learned about animations so far, and now it's time for some more animation properties, CSS properties, so that we can fully know everything about CSS animations. So the next thing that we need to know is actually animation delay is another CSS property. And animation delay, it's actually obvious. We can specify a type and say for hey box 2, you have 1 second of animation delay, and you can see the animation will be started from 1 second, and we have 1 second delay in our animation. The next thing is animation iteration count, because you can see the animations that we have, they run one time and they finish. They go back to the default thing that they had and they finish. But there's actually something called, for example, for our box 1, let's apply that. This animation iteration count, we can actually specify how many times that it should happen. For example, we can say 3 times for you. And actually, so we can, one way is to actually specify a number, and as you can see, the animation will be repeated 3 times. And there's also a word for that infinite, so we can set that on number or we can set that on infinite. So I forgot the semicolon, and when we set that on infinite, so of course it is infinite and it happens over and over and over and over again. So the next CSS property about animations that we need to learn is actually the animation direction, actually. So for the animation direction is, well, we have seen the default value for animation direction is actually on, yes, I found it, is on normal. Well, normal, it means, so we have defined some keyframes here, for example, from, to, or %. Well, on normal, it goes from to 2 or goes from 0 to 100. But if we set that on reverse, it goes from end to start. And of course, if we come back here, hit refresh, we can see it goes from yellow to green. See, if it went from yellow to green. Actually, so the animation went reversed. So we know what normal and reverse is, but alternate is that it goes from 0 to 100 and again from 100 to 0, so it goes like this. So that's alternate. And alternate reverse is just it's just reverse of the alternate. It's obvious. Once you understand alternate reverse is just obvious. So if we want to use this alternate, I think the alternate is more understandable for box 2, because in box 2 we have 3 steps. So it goes from dark blue to yellow green and goes to gray. So it happens is yellow again. It happens from start to end to a start. That's the way that we can control the animation direction. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is actual animation timing function. So the timing function is the way that the animation is being played. The default value for this timing function is on ease. Well, ease actually, so forget about those cubic. I'm going to talk about the cubic function. For example, in linear, the speed is just same throughout the journey. And as you can see, this we can control the speed of the thing. For this one, it's not that obvious. If we want to understand this timing function a little better, to understand it, for example, we can use this test, change this test to, for example, to move. Okay, to move. Just move. It's true that we are changing the background color, but we also want to move that as well. For example, we can use transform, okay, and translate in order to move something, to relocate something in with CSS, and we can say 50 pixels, for example, 50 pixels and 50 pixels. This transform, translate, relocates item to somewhere. And we can actually go to 150 pixels here, and we can still come back here and go to, for example, 100. Okay, this is it. So the animation is actually, as you can see, the animation has a delay. It starts and this is what happens. So if you want to see the animation for this move here, the animation timing function, let's set a timing function for this one, and let's change that to 4 seconds so that the animation is a little takes a little longer, and we say the animation timing function. So the default value for that was ease, and when we say the ease, you can see it starts slow, fast, then goes slow, so the timing is not same, but we can change that, for example, to linear for this one. You can see now the speed of that should be linear, and as you can see it's just linear. And the other values for this animation duration are these, and you can see the explanation for all of them. You can pause the video and see and read all of them. But that's for the animation timing function. So the last thing that I want to talk about is actually animation fill mode. And what was that animation fill mode? Actually, do you remember when I was talking about this animation that I said, well, it starts with a background color, this thing that we had, this box one. It starts with background color of light salmon, right? And let's set the iteration count to 1 so that we can see. So it starts with light salmon, and when the animation finishes, it goes back to what it was. Okay, so if we set the animation fill mode, we can control that by animation fill mode. So the default value for animation fill mode is on none, okay, which means animation fill mode none. It means when animation finished, apply no changes to the box one. For example, the box one has a background color, and when the animation finishes, it has no changes, so everything goes back to exactly what it was before too. But we can change that animation fill mode, and set that to, for example, forwards. When we set the animation fill mode to forwards, it means when the animation finished, stick with the last thing that you had. So the point is, what I'm just trying to say, we can set that on forwards, and you can see it end up with the last thing that it had. The last thing, well, it's true that the last thing was yellow, but don't forget that we did set the animation direction to reverse, so that's why it ends up with green. If the animation duration was not on reverse, for example, let's set that on alternate. Okay, sorry, it seems that I have a typo here. Come back here, hit refresh. When the animation finishes, of course, it ends up with yellow, what he had, or if it was on normal. So depending on the animation direction, this animation fill mode, when we set that on forwards, you can see that. It has some other values. In order to understand the animation fill mode of backwards, we saw none was the default one, and if we want to see, we saw the forward what does. But for the backwards, in order to understand backwards, we need to have animation delay, because without animation delay, it's just we can't understand that, because you can see when the animation finished, it went back to the default thing that it had. So it seems that this animation fill mode backward did nothing. But in order to understand this backwards, let's imagine that we have an animation delay. An animation delay is on 3 seconds. While the animation is on a delay, what happens is, hit refresh, it has the starting position and then goes to the yellow. So while the thing is on delay, actually the background color of yellow will be, the green will be applied. It waits and waits, so the animation starts, and then everything goes back. So this backwards is for that. So without animation delay, this is meaningless. If you comment this out, while we are on delay, you can see the background color doesn't change. So this is animation fill mode. This backwards is understandable with that. The other thing is, so we had one forward, so we saw what does that. We had one backwards, and there's something else called both. When it was on backwards, okay, when we had that on backwards, when animation finishes, it goes back to default. Okay, when it's on forward, It doesn't go to the default, but while we're on delay, we do not have that green. Okay? But if we set that on both, it means both backward and forward. So while we're on delay, it's green, yes, and the animation happen, and we will end up with what we had in animation. So this is the animation fill mode, and now we can say that we understand everything about animations. And the last thing that I want to say is animation shorthand, because now we have all of these animations here, and there's actually a shorthand for that. For example, for background, you see we had background color, we had background position, we had background repeats. We had so many different CSS properties for background, but we had a shorthand of background for all of them: background color, background position, background. And same thing goes for animation. Rather than writing animation name, animation duration, animation iteration count, all of them, there's a shorthand command for that. So imagine that there's another box here. Let's have a box 3, and we are going to use the shorthand command for our third box, and we are going to apply that move thing that we had. So let's copy all of these, and also we could have another selector, for example only a box selector, and move all of these duplicate CSS properties in that if you want to have a good code. Anytime that you felt that you can have an improvement on your codes, it doesn't matter if you are in middle of something, always having a good code is good. So let's remove these lines here, so everything is good. And also for this box 1 here, you can see we can remove all of these things here. So now our code is much better. So let's come back to our box 3, the thing that we had, and we are going to set an animation for that, the animation only. So there's an order for that. So the first one is actually animation name, and then animation duration, animation timing function, delay, iteration count, direction, and fill mode. So we can say go ahead and use the move animation. That was the first one. That's the name of the animation. The second one is duration. We can say the duration is 2 seconds. And timing function should be, for example, linear, or let's use is in out. Okay, and the delay should be, for example, 1 second. Okay, and the count, let's use infinite for that. And for the direction, let's use alternate. And for the fill mode, let's go for both. Okay, so this is it. This is the shorthand command that we wrote all of them, and this is the order of writing things. So we can come back here, hit refresh, and sure enough, let's use we should have used BG change, maybe. That was a little better, I think. Maybe let's use BG change rather than move. BG change. So come back here, hit refresh, and so that's it. That's it. We learned everything. So the only thing that I didn't cover was actually that function that we had for timing function. Because for timing function we also had a function, this cubic Bezier, whatever that is, and we can use some numbers inside that, and the numbers are between from 0 to 1. There are numbers, and you can control this for yourself, but I think it's just unnecessary. I have never used this in any project. Just you can use these words. I think the is actually looks better than them all. That's at least what I believe. So this is it. Hope you learned everything about animation in CSS, and hope that I see you in my other videos.